What Embargo? Episode Veintiséis. I'm your co-host, Big Tuna. With me, as always, is Catfish, but we have a special guest with us, Colin Ganley. Colin, welcome.
Yeah.
Hey, guys. Glad to be here.
All the way from Nicaragua, hiding in the back door of a bakery. Am I correct?
That is
a bakery.
Do they have a beer fridge in the bakery? Is that what I see? You know, drinking beers in the back, or what?
Absolutely. Drinking Victoria Classica here straight out of the bakery.
That's awesome.
I might as well give them a shout-out. It's the best bakery. It's actually a French bakery here in Leon called Pan y Paz, Bread and Peace, and it is phenomenal. If anyone ever goes to Leon, you've got to check it out.
So where are you located right now, for all of us dumb Americans who have no clue what you're talking about?
Yeah, so I live in Nicaragua, but not near the cigar fields. We're about 2.5 hours away from the tobacco fields. I live on the Pacific Ocean in a town called Leon. It's an old colonial city.
How the hell did you get there?
You know, I was a reporter and writer, writing about cigars for a long time, going to Nicaragua a lot. But I always did the same thing that everybody does, going Managua up to Esteli. You fly in, and then you just go to where the factories are. Mm-hmm. And one time I decided to just rent a car and drive around the country to check it out. And I realized that it's actually a really beautiful country. I mean, you know, the cigars are great in Esteli, but there's not really much going on there, to be honest. And Managua is just a crazy Latin American capital city, in my opinion. But once you get out of there and you go to the different colonial cities and different stuff, it's actually a really nice place. So when my wife and I decided we wanted to start a coffee company, Nicaragua was kind of an obvious choice because it's just it's a great origin for the beans, and also nobody was doing what we wanted to do with coffee here. And Leon has just a great quality of life. I mean, we're right on the Pacific Ocean. We're 2 hours from the airport. And the town's full of universities and cafes and restaurants and stuff. So it's just a nice quality of life. I'm originally from Minnesota, and my wife is from Missouri. So it's a pretty big stretch from where we grew up. But there's a great quality of life here, except that it's very hot.
Well, let's back up a little bit just so folks know what you're all about. For those of you that don't know, Colin has a coffee company called Twin Engine. And if you are not familiar with it, and you're a coffee snob like myself, it is absolutely fantastic. I believe I reviewed it. God, I don't know if I reviewed it in my big coffee write-up that I did. I've done 3 or 4 different coffee write-ups where I paired 4 or 5 different single regions with different cigars, and I've done that over the last few years. At least once a year I do something big like that. I'm pretty sure your guys' stuff made it in. I was floored with it. So, for those of you that don't know, one of the things Colin does is he owns Twin Engine Coffee. So that's what he's talking about. That's one of the reasons why we brought him on here. And the other reason is he does cigar tourism in Cuba. So we're going to talk about both of those things tonight. But I figured before he starts going crazy and telling everybody about these beans, we should tell him what the company is. What's your website?
Sorry, you're cutting out a little bit, but the TwinEngineCoffee.com is for the
Excellent.
coffee, and CigarTourism.com is for the tours.
Okay. So
Now,
how long have you been in the coffee?
Well, before let's forget the coffee for 2 seconds, man. Let's focus on cigars.
Sorry, I love the coffee.
I know you do. You love the bean. You're super excited.
Okay.
Colin, you were with Cigar Journal, correct?
Yeah, that's right. That's where I kind of got my start in the cigar business, was writing for Cigar Journal, and then over time I became the editor, and then I bought a piece of it, and then last summer I sold my share of the magazine in order to not have any conflict, in order to be able to do other stuff in the cigar business.
And when did you start out with Cigar Journal? Was that like your first intro into the cigar industry?
Yeah, writing was definitely my first, the way that I entered into the industry, and it must have been around 2004, 2005, something like that.
Okay, so that was like before the boutique boom in the United States, you could say.
It was, yeah. I mean, it was an interesting time because as those guys were starting to, people who we take for granted today, like Pete Johnson, Dion Giolito, some of the older boutiques from that boom, they hadn't really started, or they were just coming out with their first cigar back when I started.
So were you a journalist before?
No, I was a graduate student, and I was living in England doing a master's degree in economic history, and I was running out of money. So I needed to do something to make money, and I thought that writing about cigars would be pretty cool because I was smoking cigars almost every day.
Yeah.
So it just seemed like a natural fit. Plus, I thought I might get some free cigars. The same reason a lot of people get into writing about cigars or talking about cigars.
Sure.
So you're in England smoking cigars, smoking Cuban probably. Yeah.
Of course.
What are some of the Cubans you were smoking back in 04, 05?
Back in those days, I liked a lot of the real classic cigars. I liked the Monte Cristo No. 2, but more often I was smoking Romeos. I was on a budget, so I tended to go towards like the lower half of the price spectrum. So I was probably smoking a lot of like Hermosos, Tubo No. 2s, sometimes Cazadors, and every once in a while, when I knew I was going to have a long night, I'd have the Churchills. I smoked a lot of that. I didn't really smoke a lot of the Cohibas for budget reasons. I tended to stick to stuff that was more like under $10. So a lot of like Monte Cristo No. 2 and smaller. But yeah, Romeo and Monte Cristo, like a lot of people, were how I got in. But then I quickly kind of spread from that and started to experiment with some of the smaller brands. And it's only been recently that I've really started to smoke a lot of Cohibas. I guess maybe in the last 5 years. But yeah, back in the day, it was a lot of it was price driven.
Yeah.
What's your favorite Cohiba right now, currently?
My favorites have always been the Esplendido and the Siglo No. 4 or 5.
Okay.
The 4, like around the 4 or the 5, are ones I can pick up anytime. Although I love having the 1, the Siglo 1, all the time. That's a phenomenal cigar to just pick up whenever you want a quick smoke that has a great flavor. But I tend to go for something a little bit bigger just because it seems like a better value. So I'll go for the 4 or 5. And the Esplendidos for when I'm sitting down to write a long article or do something like that.
Yeah. I love the 4. That's my favorite.
4 is good one. 5 is great. That is terrific. So you're smoking Cubans, then you go to Cigar Journal, smoking a whole variety of cigars. Then when is it that you head to Cuba? When is it that they send you or you go to Cuba?
I guess, well, one of the things, because I wanted to jump into the whole cigar thing as quickly as possible to try to learn, because I felt like, you know what it's like when you first start a job, you go in and everybody knows more than you.
All right.
But there are a lot of people who are willing to teach you if you just put in a little effort. So I realized that I could go to these tropical countries and learn from these, big name people that we wrote about in the magazines, and it was a cool experience, and that they would want me to be there. And simultaneously, I would learn so much that I would just get to like expert level really quickly if I just did it. So for about 3 years, I just kept traveling to Nicaragua, Honduras, Cuba, and the Dominican Republic over and over again. And I guess probably the first time I went to Cuba would have been about 2004, 2005. It was right away. As soon as I realized that I qualified as a journalist to travel legally, I went.
You're probably one of the first people from Minnesota to go there in the 2000s. Probably still.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things. It's a funny thing. Not a lot of Americans have been there, so it's and now I find it really strange. There are more now than there previously were Americans in Cuba, and so it's kind of an odd experience to be sitting in one of the places that I'm used to sitting, having a drink and a cigar, something like that, talking with some people, and all of a sudden some Americans will sit down next to me. I find it a little strange every time.
It'd probably make me want to run away.
Well, sometimes I want to talk to them, and sometimes I don't want them to hear my accent.
I understand. I lived in Budapest in Hungary in Eastern Europe for many years. So when you saw the American tourists, there's the aspect of how can I help them, and at the same time run away as fast as possible so they don't swallow you around.
Yeah.
So,
have either of you guys been to Cuba?
Nope, not yet.
Never. The goal.
It's on
Been
the
to
list.
Nicaragua.
Okay. Well, you'll have to come down. I'm going in a couple days.
Yeah. And now you go, because now you go with your cigar tourism, and I want to. When did you decide to start cigar tourism? And then we can talk about kind of, because you just do more than Cuba. You do Dominican Republic, Honduras, Nicaragua.
Not really Honduras anymore. There's not enough interest, and it's a little dangerous. But Nicaragua and Dominican Republic is kind of what it's narrowed down to until Cuba became an option. I started taking people to Nicaragua and then the Dominican about 7 years ago. What it was just simply people thought it was cool, the trips that I was taking to these places as a journalist, and they would always ask if they could come with. And realistically, I couldn't take a friend with me while I'm working because I just wouldn't do anything.
Yeah.
So enough people wanted to go that I thought, well, maybe I could just put together, a trip for a group of people. And the concept was always with cigar tourism that it wouldn't be like one of those trips where the manufacturer sponsors it and you kind of get propagandized the whole time. It would be where we visit multiple factories, meet with a number of people, and really get more of a sense of the whole town. So if it's Esteli, for example, we would visit, I don't know, Perdomo, Pepin Garcia, Nestor Plasencia, Padron. We would visit like those four, let's say. And then we would also go to, and Oliva probably, and then we would go to the tobacco fields of one of them. And then every night we would go to a different restaurant in town, and we would basically compare all the different, not only the cigars that they're making, but the techniques and what we saw and the vibe that we got from the factories. And that was always kind of what made it different, what made cigar tourism different from the other tours, is getting more of a broad picture of that town and of what cigars are being made there. And so for, what, 7 years, I kept doing that, and there was always interest every year, a few groups every year. I think the most trips ever in a year was like 5 or 6, something like that. And then about 3 years ago, I started applying to the U.S. Treasury Department for permission to take Americans legally to Cuba. And I sent in the application. They told me they needed more details. I wasn't able to get the details in time, so they rejected it. Same thing happened again. And it was kind of a game that was being played because they didn't want to give a lot of the licenses out.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, this year, 2015, we successfully have the license to be able to take Americans to Cuba. Our trips have to be educational in nature, with a heavy emphasis on the trip participants meeting regular Cuban people, like not members of the Communist Party, not officials, just regular people talking to regular people and understanding how the other side lives.
So how good is that? How long is that license good for? Is that good for just a year, or does it last forever, indefinitely?
Typically, the licenses last a year. In the current environment, I have no confidence in how long anything is going to stay the same. Things are changing every month. Some little thing changes. Like after this happened, suddenly it just became possible for us to book tickets with the charter companies. Because in the past, you always had to go through this cartel of travel agents who had a special permission to book tickets to Cuba.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, for some reason, they just said, no, don't worry about it. Any tour operator can just book tickets directly with the charter companies. So every month, it seems things are changing. And so I don't even want to speculate about the licenses. Because at some point, the licenses, I imagine, are going to come off. I don't know how long it's going to take for that to happen. Eventually, people are going to be able to just go if they want to go and book a ticket online. At the moment, they can't. But who knows when that's going to change. But it will.
So in the meantime, then...
No, you go ahead.
So in the meantime, then, since it's supposed to be educational, are you taking them to see all the different sites, I guess, if you will, in Cuba? Not necessarily just tobacco-related? Or are people joining that are not wanting to go see tobacco? I guess.
There are some. Right now, I have two itineraries. The only one that I've actually executed has been a tobacco one. So that means that basically what we're doing is we're going to a couple different cigar factories. We're meeting with spending time with the people who work in the cigar factories, spending time with the people who work in the shops. We're going to the tobacco farms out in Pinar del Rio, spending time with those people. And then we do a little bit of other cultural stuff. We do a similar thing to what we do with the cigars, but with the rum, with the Havana Club Company. And so it's a very similar experience. Kind of meet the people, understand what they do, what their life is like, and also learn about the products and what they make. And then if people have the energy after hours, after dinner, they have any smart person would go to sleep, but everybody who was on the previous trip went out with me. We went to go see live jazz and a bunch of live music performances and different things like that. So, we're trying to pack it with cultural activities, even in sort of the off period.
Yeah. What about baseball?
I haven't investigated it. Someone just sent me an email today, actually, asking about baseball. If there'll be any baseball games going on during the next event. The thing is, because of the Treasury Department license, I have to make sure that anything that goes on the schedule fits within their criteria of what the trip needs to be.
Yeah.
And so you could do it. I mean, there's a way, just like,
I'm just thinking about what, is culturally relevant there, at least, from a dumb American's perspective. When I think of Cuba, I think of rum, sugar, cigars, baseball, and jazz music, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's what I think of.
Yeah.
That's what comes to mind, I guess.
So where I was going with that is I do also have a second itinerary, which is what I'm calling the cultural trip, which only has a really small amount of cigar and has a lot more on the music, on the food side. Primarily music, food, visual art, and cigars. So that's a separate itinerary that I'm going to offer, because I think that there's the market actually outside of cigars is much bigger than the one inside cigars. But right now, obviously, because I know some people in the cigar business, all the interest so far has been in cigars. And there's just, some people want to bring their kid or their wife or different people like that who, may want to do something a little bit different. But, yeah.
No, that's great that you offer the two options. I mean, obviously cigars are interests of myself and Catfish and many other cigar people, but the actual island and the culture and other aspects, to be honest, are probably much more interesting.
Oh, the music.
And
I mean, don't get me wrong. I want some custom rolls, but I want to listen to music all night long. Honestly.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's one of those. Pass up the opportunity to go around Havana and, I mean, parts of Cuba. It's terrific. So that's great, though. I mean, it's important that the cultural aspect, that educational aspect. I understand why the Treasury Department has that in place, but it is definitely important and I think even beneficial for people who are going to the country.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. It's the tricky thing is, when I'm putting together the tours is just as long as everybody agrees on what they want to do, then it's great. Then I can probably make a lot of different things fit into the Treasury Department guidelines. But when you start getting a lot of divergent interests, that's when it gets complicated. So that's why I'm trying to separate it out. So there's like the cultural trip on one hand and the cigar trip on the other.
How many people normally go on a trip? How many people do you book on a trip?
I'd like to keep the numbers between about 10 and 15.
Where do they stay?
Sorry?
Where do they stay?
It really so here's what's happened so far. I haven't even been able to really put up the website with all the information. I've been planning trips because a lot of retailers have called me and said, "Hey, I've got 15 guys who want to go. Can we pick some dates and make this happen?" And so I've agreed to that, and a lot of the calendar for this year has actually gotten filled up because of that. So that's why my website isn't up. And with each one of those, they're kind of custom tours, and so in a lot of cases, people want to stay at the Hotel Nacional, So I'm trying to set that up. It's a very popular hotel, so I can only do that when we have a good amount of lead time. But in the previous trip, we also stayed at the Parque Central, which is a really nice modern renovation hotel that's right next to Old Havana and also about 5 blocks from the Partagas factory.
Okay.
So that's a really cool spot with a great location and nice rooms. But I think, you know, for a lot of first-time visitors, the Nacional is really the iconic place that most people want to stay.
Yeah, that's the one that I've heard of and that everybody talks about. At least it's a name that rings a bell in my mind. You know?
Yeah, and it's a funny hotel because it's where I stayed for like the first 5 or 6 years that I used to go there. Now I stay in private houses, but I still love that hotel, even though the rooms probably haven't been updated properly in like 60 years. I mean, they get a new mattress when they need one and things like that. But the overall style of the whole thing is very old, very antique, and cool. I mean, and there's nothing like having a cigar on the patio overlooking the Caribbean from the bluffs there. I mean, it's really, it's a gorgeous spot to have a cigar. I think that's what wins people over every time. Even if they don't smoke, they just have a mojito there, and it's beautiful.
Oh man, just talking about mojitos makes me prefer mojitos. So. It's. I mean, so you started going in 2000, 4 and 5. Now it's 2015. How much change have you seen in the country throughout those few years?
When I first started going to Cuba, Fidel Castro was the president, and nobody talked politics in public. Nobody.
Yeah. That's what I've been told from friends, is that it was really like not something. It was very. You don't ever speak about politics if you go there. That's what I was told.
It used to be like that, and people used to be very nervous if you would bring up politics in any public place. They always kind of would look at the bartenders and stuff to see if there were any narcs in the bar or different things like that. It was a very, there was an ambiance there of fear, and that's gone. So I mean, that's a massive change. I mean, you can start a conversation with your waiter about politics right now, and he'll speak more or less openly about politics, about elections, about the future with the U.S., pretty much anything. I mean, and that's a pretty dramatic difference, because the way you feel when you're there really changes with that kind of a thing. I mean, all of a sudden people speak freely. It's a very different feeling.
So did you, as an American, feel like an outsider, if you will, for the last 5-10 years or so until this kind of took place, or what? Was it were you always comfortable down there? Ever uncomfortable, I guess?
There were only a few times that I was a little uncomfortable, and that was, you have to remember, obviously, Cuba's a communist country, and they have a kind of a fetish with control. They believe that they can control people, and so, as a visitor, especially as a member of the press, officially registered and everything with the different organizations, they were watching me, and they would follow me around. And so, that can be a little bit awkward. There were lengthy interviews at the airport as I was coming in or as I was leaving, different things like that. I would get stopped sometimes by the police to just ask what I was doing. There were every time that I would go to a different private house, the owner of the house would get a phone call from some government agency, and they would just ask a bunch of questions about what I had told her, where I was going, who I had been meeting with, stuff like that. So, little things like that definitely, make you feel like you're somewhere not home.
So
definitely. Go ahead.
I mean, did that kind of put you in a mindset on a daily basis where you had to have, a very strict story that you keep to all the time, and you never ever kind of go away from that? You know, I mean, like everything that you say to everybody is the same thing every day, because if you say one thing that's not the same, you know, who knows what they say to this guy, and then next thing you know, you're in jail.
I was never really, I was never really worried about going to jail because I wasn't doing anything that was, anything like that. I mean, but yeah, it does put you in kind of two minds. You know, when you're talking with people you don't know, or people who have a lot of questions for you and you don't understand why. You know, you give them a stock story that's not going to raise any flags, and then every once in a while the thing that I really like about Cuban people is you can develop some good friendships pretty quickly, and it's fairly easy to tell the genuine people from the agents or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And so fairly quickly I developed a couple of friends who we could just talk about anything with. And so, that was kind of like a release valve for the situation. But yeah, definitely. I mean, whenever I would go to one of the rental houses or hotels, or talking with any officials, or talking with Habanos or whoever I was talking to, I would stick to a stock story to not raise any flags. So yeah, you do kind of become almost duplicitous.
Yeah, it would be weird. I mean, I guess just obviously coming from our country to where you can kind of trust people. I mean, I don't want to say you can trust everybody, but you can trust the fact that you can go out on the street and be an asshole and not go to jail for it. You know, which sometimes is a bad thing, and people take advantage of it. But the reality is, you can speak your mind and not have to worry about anything. So that would be, I don't know. Did you know anybody? Here's another question. Did you ever know anybody who got thrown in jail, Americans, while you were down there for odd reasons?
Americans, no. Only Cubans.
Okay. Why would Cubans get thrown in jail on a regular basis? I guess.
The guys that I knew who went to jail, it was never really clear exactly why they went to jail.
Yeah.
That's the big problem with the Cuban judicial system, is there's not a lot of transparency. There's probably just as much negotiation in the American system and the Cuban system. The difference, when somebody negotiates a plea in the U.S. system, it's public record. You know what it was. In the Cuban system, you don't know if they were guilty and they did some kind of exchange. You don't know if they were found innocent and that's why they got out. It's very hard to tell. They were all people in the cigar industry, and they didn't come back to the cigar industry unless they were found innocent.
Huh. Yeah, because I always hear stories of. I mean, obviously we hear stories of people who defect in other countries, but one big one recently was Hamlet. That seems to be a story that everybody is freaking out over because he's moved to Florida. He's working for Rocky now.
Yeah, I spoke to him a couple weeks ago about his move, but I don't know what the rumor is. Was there a rumor that he was getting in trouble and that's why he left? Or?
Oh, I have no idea. I honestly have. I am extremely uneducated in that regard and would have no opinions on it because I wouldn't want to say anything. But you always hear about those guys leaving, and it just makes me wonder how many of them don't necessarily get out. Don't make it out for whatever reason. Because I've heard. I don't know how much truth there is into all these, but I tend to believe them at sometimes. But I've acquired cigars over the years that seem to come out of factories from guys that are there that aren't necessarily banded, and
yeah, I mean, there's a lot of that. I mean, are you guys? Can you still hear me?
Farm rolls, custom rolls, all great. So,
yeah,
we can hear you.
Sorry, I think I locked up.
Okay, yeah, it froze up for a second. It's all that. I mean, all that stuff is illegal, but there's a certain amount of theft that's tolerated in Cuba, and it's you have to be Cuban to understand exactly where that line is, because everybody's got a job, everybody's making about 20 to 35 bucks a month. They're getting their little ration of food every month. It's not a lot, and so I would say you probably have to be getting some money in addition to that in order to really be properly nourished.
Yeah.
much less be able to go out and drink and listen to music every once in a while or whatever. So everybody, pretty much everybody gets a little bit more money than that, whether it's from, they have a brother who's working in a cigar factory selling some cigars, or they have a cousin who's working as a prostitute, or whether it's, somebody who works as a waiter in a fancy hotel and gets tips, or whatever it is. All that stuff, all that money that's getting generated is going back to these families to make up for about a $10 to $25 deficit in the food budget every month, plus whatever,
Is the general consensus, do the people seem hungry?
No. People don't seem hungry at all.
Yeah.
It's a weird thing. I mean, everybody's getting by. Some people are happier about it than others. But it's generally a very, people are just generally very happy there. People have adjusted to being satisfied with a pretty simple way of living, and they get, rum and food and music and all this kind of stuff all the time, and a lot of people are very content with the way that they live. The thing that people don't always take into consideration with the compensation question in Cuba is you have to remember that everybody lives basically for free. Like, they have a house that's a lot nicer than your average person's house here in Nicaragua. It'll be like a 1950s modern whatever suburban house, well kept but with chipping paint, and it's free. So when you've got that as kind of a baseline, then really all you need to worry about is food, transportation, things like that, and extra. Yeah,
so, I saw some houses in Nicaragua.
That high. What's that?
Yeah, I mean, I was in Nicaragua. I was in Esteli. I'm not blind. I saw some houses. I saw how people live. Not like they're living much better. And I know, I enjoy cigars, and I understand that's a big part of, the income for that city and that town, and that's what a lot of people are involved in. But, it's not like they're living this glamorous life compared to Cuba. I don't know, maybe, kind of sounds like what you're saying is, it's not like the rollers or any individuals in Nicaragua are living a much greater life than they are in Cuba.
No, they're definitely not. They have more. I'm not a communist at all. Quite the opposite. I'm pretty much libertarian. But the thing that I find interesting, when my last group went down, some of the people who were on the tour were posting pictures on Facebook, and somebody had made a comment on one of their pictures. It was a picture of a happy cigar roller in one of the factories in Cuba, and somebody had made a comment that said something like, "Yeah, but you should see how they live." And the person had connections with the Nicaraguan cigar industry, and I was thinking to myself, is this guy nuts? Does he really want to draw attention to this? Because the cigar rollers in Cuba may not have a lot of money for food and different things like that, but their house is probably 10 times better than the average cigar roller's house in Esteli. There's a good chance that a cigar roller's house in Esteli might not have, it might have a plastic wall.
Yeah.
Whereas, or outdoor plumbing. They're making a lot more money per month in Esteli than these guys are in Cuba, but they also have to pay for everything.
Yeah.
The way a person actually lives is, is pretty affected by these major things.
So another question, and I think my video froze up, but can you guys hear me? Looks like
I can hear you.
Being that you've obviously been in the industry and gone around all these different countries, it at least seems like it's marketed to the Americans that the Nicaraguans and the Dominicans bring in these Cuban rollers, and they always market on their cigar line, yes, these are rolled by level 9 Cuban rollers here in Nicaragua and the Dominican. Does it seem like those guys are exported out of Cuba, like they kind of figure out, like, oh, I can roll here, and now I'm going to go move over to this country or that country and live the dream, if you will? Is that something that is that a feeling in Cuba at all amongst the rollers, or are they just happy where they're at?
I don't think so. I think that the examples that I know of that marketing where American-based cigar companies are telling you that level 9 rollers from Cuba are rolling their cigars, it's like they found an employee and they discovered that they were rated that highly when they were in Cuba, and so then they just decided to market it. It's not like the people in Cuba are like, well, if I get to level 8, then I'll be more desirable by these other companies. Because I doubt that there's any increase in pay for being a higher level rated roller. I mean, I'm just guessing, but I would be really surprised if there was. I know a couple of those people who are being marketed as being those high level rollers, and they are, or they were, but they're also like around, their mid to late 50s, and they were just leaving Cuba because, for whatever personal reason, and then decided to keep rolling cigars in the other country to make a little scratch.
Yeah.
What they know, it's what they've done.
Yeah. So okay, to go off that question then, kind of keep going on it. If these guys are obviously touted highly to us as a marketing ploy, if you will, how many of those category level rollers are in Cuba? When you go to say the Upman factory, the Partagas factory, is there like a chain of command? Like, okay, well, there's this guy and that lady, and they're both level 9, and everybody else is a peon. Or is there are there dozens of these kinds of rollers around?
No, it's a pretty small minority. I mean, there are some factories that probably don't have any, or just have 1 or 2. The best factories like El Aguito probably has a handful. H. Upman, I'm sure, has a few. Romeo probably has a couple or a few. But some of the other factories may not have any at all. It's a pretty small number.
So are those rollers specifically rolling certain brands or certain releases? Like the Vejeque is always rolled by number 9, category 9 rollers, or only the Reservas or the limited edition limitadas or those kinds of things?
Yeah, they do tend to do that. The best rollers tend to go on a lot of special projects or just really difficult cigars to roll. So, it'll be a lot of that. Vejique, actually, when you mention that, I don't know if they put some of the best rollers on that or not, because it's kind of an easy cigar to roll, except for that pigtail. So I don't actually know if they put some of the better rollers on that, or if it's not working.
Yeah, it just, I don't know, it just popped into my head as something that, makes me wonder because for us, and I'm not going to name a company, but let's say there's a company out of Florida that makes high-end cigars that sell for $15 to $20 a piece, and they tell us, these are only 1,000 were made, and they were all rolled by this, level 9 roller, and all of our stuff is only made by the level 9 rollers, blah blah blah. So, yeah, it would make me wonder if Cuba does the same thing, to a degree.
They don't market it at all. I mean, they don't even.
Of course, they don't.
I mean, they don't even like to talk about what factory things come from. I mean, that's still coded.
Yeah.
It's they don't really talk about it. The only cigars that I know that are definitely rolled by those high-level people would be like the Fundador.
Yeah.
And the Salomons, whenever they do those.
Yeah.
Stuff like that.
Yeah.
Those are tough sizes. I mean, any factory you're going to have certain rollers rolling those elite cigars, you could say, and it's that's the way it goes. What factories have you been to, and what are some factories that really stand out to you as personal favorites? Not necessarily, just big names. What are some of your favorites to go to in Havana?
My favorite factory to smoke out of is El Aguito. I don't know what it is that they do there, but they seem to have the best cohibas always. I don't know why. There's some story about it. They do a little extra fermenting there in the warehouses behind the mansion, because the factory is an old mansion, which you guys I'm sure know. But behind that mansion, they have a much bigger building that's basically like a big barn, and in that barn they supposedly do a bunch of fermenting to age the tobacco a little bit longer before they make the cohibas. That's one of my. That's definitely my favorite to smoke out of. As far as places to visit, I've seen the factories so many times. I think at this point, what I like is seeing the weird ones, like the little factories out in the country.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Where you'll have a small town that's where one of the major employers is this cigar factory, and it's just kind of cool. I remember I went into one a couple of years ago, and they had. I always like looking at the lector, the person who reads to the workers while they're rolling,
Mm-hmm.
and I always check out what they're reading to them. And I remember in this one factory, it was in the Havana province, but down south. The guy was reading an educational book on sex to the workers. And it was like a sex ed book for junior high school students or something. So when I discovered this, all the ladies, it was like 80%, 90% women working in that factory. They all kind of like blushed and started laughing and whatever because they had a guy reading it to them. And I asked him about it. He's like, why do these ladies like it so much? He's like, I don't know why they like it so much, but this is the 8th time that they've made me read this.
I mean, that's technically part of cultural education for the tourists,
awesome.
too. I mean,
yeah. So I mean, I like little stuff like that. The factories pretty much all function the same. They get their blends and everything from central location. So the factories are really just places to do some leaf sorting and some rolling and some packaging. But there are little cultural things, architectural things that make each one of them kind of fun and interesting. And then of course, what they're rolling at the time is always interesting.
So as far as the blends are concerned, my education stems from watching videos of foreigners, filming farmers, talking to farmers, and you hear about from the farmers the different tobacco strains that they like and the different strains that they're using for filler and binder. How much blending goes on down there?
Well, a lot, but it happens very differently because Cuba's, when the government consolidated all the existing cigar companies into one, they tried to bring in everything that they could under one house, and some of that stuff they couldn't do, but some things they could. And one of the things that they decided that they could bring all into one house was blending and fermentation. So basically, all the tobacco after it gets collected out in the provinces, it goes to an intermediary stage in the province where it goes from all the farms into one place in that locality. Then from that place, it goes to one place in Havana, and then at that place it gets actually the full fermentation, and then it gets sent out to the factories from that point. And so at that facility, that's where all the important decisions are really made about the blend and what it's going to taste like and who's going to roll it.
Yeah, because what's interesting to me about Habanos, I guess, is you have a Monte Cristo number 2, and it's the same. I would assume it's a similar blend, and the blend stays consistent. And the idea is to put out this consistent cigar. I mean, I love H. Upmann. H. Upmann's my favorite brand, and I've collected H. Upmann number 2s from 2004 to 2014, and I try and get every year, and I detect some differences here and there, but I think sometimes those differences may be obviously due to the different different year of tobacco or different periods of aging. But for the most part, if I age one for a significant amount of time, I'm always very happy and I get a very similar experience. So it just seems a lot different to me than, say, the Nicaraguan or Dominican communities where there's a new blend coming out every 6 months, you know what I mean? And a new boutique maker coming out every week, it seems like,
Yeah, I mean, and I think that's what a lot of people are really attracted to about Habanos is the history of it. When you smoke one of these cigars, and H. Upmann number 2 is a classic example. You're smoking a cigar that people would have been smoking, during World War I, right?
Oh, yeah.
Like, there's something appealing to that. There's a nostalgia that I think that taps into, that these new these new products don't really have any way to really get their hooks into. So it's an advantage that these old brands have.
And do you think they, to consistently make the same product every year, obviously the leaf is going to vary from year to year. So I would assume that takes some time and sorting to go through, whatever leaf they get from the farmers and say, okay, well, this would actually be good in the Upman 2s. It's going to stay consistent if we use this leaf this year. I mean, are those kinds of things happening, do you think?
Yeah, that definitely happens. I mean, you've got a lot of different regions that all perform differently. Some are really variable year to year, and some of them are really consistent. So when you've got like wrapper in San Luis and San Juan y Martinez and Pinar del Rio, those are pretty consistent products. So you can, your yield is going to vary from year to year, but the taste isn't that much unless you change seed varieties. But when you start getting into filler, which is provides the most emphasis on taste, then all of a sudden you're getting into a whole different ball game because you're bringing in filler from the east of the island, which is like 70% of the island. You've got an island to the south of Cuba called the Isle of Youth, where they're also growing tobacco. And then you've got filler that's grown, really rich filler, actually to the south of Havana. It's my favorite filler. You know that like barnyard smell and that really earthy taste that you sometimes get in certain stronger Cuban cigars?
Yeah.
The tobacco that provides that taste comes from the Havana province down on the south side of the island. And so that's my favorite of the different regions for filler. But you also have filler over in Pinar del Rio. And so each of these different growing regions can actually fluctuate quite a bit. So, Partagas one year may have some filler from Pinar del Rio, and the next year it may not have any filler from Pinar del Rio because they're just trying to keep the flavor the same, not necessarily where it came from.
So now, in your experience, and this is something that I've had some experience with, I kind of feel like the Cubans blend a certain way, but the tobacco is tobacco in the sense that if you want somebody to blend you a strong cigar, like I've had some custom blends that I've given to guys, and they're like, "There's no way this is Cuban." I'm like, "It's all Cuban. It's just has extra Ligero, and it's gonna knock you on your rear." So, a guy like you, who's more knowledgeable and who's been around all those places, if you're in the in crowd down there, can you have guys make you cigars with, say, tobacco from the region you were talking about with the rich fillers and those kinds of things? I mean, is that the kind of things that the guys at the hotels get their hands on, or are the farmers rolling their own cigars? Are the guys is there some guy in the Upman factory who particularly likes strong cigars, so he's just making his own that are strong as hell? Those kinds of things happen?
There's some stuff like that. It's really, but I mean, basically no. Almost none of that goes on. There's very little knowledge of what regions produce what flavors outside of the professionals who do that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, however, all the different things you just mentioned do happen. So like, the guys in the factory, want to make the strongest cigar that they can make, and so they do, and they play around with stuff like that. And the farmers also actually are allowed to keep. The farm structure is really strange in Cuba because they have to sell their production to one buyer, and they don't get to pay the price. However, they do get to hold back a certain percentage of their crop for their own personal use. So they do play around with that stuff. Unfortunately, I don't know of any custom rollers or anybody, especially not the people in the hotels, who have good access to the different tobaccos from the different regions. Because theoretically, if you knew a couple good farms in each region, you could drive around and go get those. But that's an expensive proposition. So, you know what I mean? So I don't know anybody in the hotels, and I suspect that you and I have very different opinions about custom rolled cigars from Cuba because I have a very low opinion of them.
And I know a lot of guys that share that, and my experience has been, honestly, they're just different, and that's about it. And there's no guarantee that the leaf is going to be any good. So in our gray market, we see a lot of people who greatly overvalue them. and think they're worth shit tons of money. And
yeah, and I mean, and they are interesting in the sense that people are making some interesting sizes, especially at Conde de Villeneuve. You know, they're known for making those big fat cigars and stuff. But the problem that I have with them is just they're never the same, and the rollers have no idea what tobaccos they're getting.
yeah,
Even if they tell you that they do, they're probably lying. There are a few people who have some idea of what tobacco they're getting.
uh-huh.
The whole reason that there are people rolling cigars in the La Casa del Habanos in those different hotels is because Habanos wanted to do something to promote cigars to visitors who were visiting Cuba. And
Okay.
so they set up this program. They were like, okay, we're going to put rollers in each of these primary spots, and we're going to send them tobacco every month so that they can just roll demonstration cigars. And it's exactly that program that continues today. So they don't really care what tobacco they're sending them, and it shows. They send real kind of middle-of-the-road stuff that doesn't make generally stuff that's all that interesting, and the rollers have the difficult job of trying to do something interesting and exciting with that.
Yeah.
You know, so they'll do stuff with extra Ligero or with no Ligero or different things like that. And they'll do a lot of different sizes and shapes, which is probably the best thing that they can do with their
Yeah, and I
skills.
think that's, if anything has intrigued me the most about them, or the ones that I've had the best experiences with, are stuff like that, you know, because to me it just gives me a different, it's just a change up, you know. And I almost wish that there was some stronger blends, because I personally, like, I don't like full-bodied cigars at all. Like, I can't smoke the powerhouse Nicaraguans and Dominicans, but I love it when I find a fuller cigar that knocks me on my rear, but has a great finish to it, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And I have some custom Cubans that I've got from guys that do that because they've asked them for double Ligero or whatever. And they may not make the most complex, mind-blowing cigar, but when I sit down and smoke it, it's like I get this great full-bodied experience that I would get with, say, a strong Nicaraguan cigar, but without all the harsh aftertaste in the back of my mouth, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, it is a lot of fun when you can play with some of those different tobaccos, because, you know, Cuban tobacco is a unique tobacco. It has a real distinct profile, and if you can actually tweak it, it's a lot of fun to do that. But of course, the problem is it's a state-run industry, and they're very controlled.
Yeah.
So it's challenging to do that. Every once in a while, you can get into a situation where you can play around with this stuff on a really small scale.
Uh-huh.
But I don't know. I mean, you know, one day, Habanos is changing. Year after year, they open, 1 millimeter more to new ideas. That'll let people who are really interested in cigars kind of play around and have more of a thrill with what they're doing.
Yeah.
They've been doing a good job. I think Habanos has been doing a good job of paying attention to the market, and they discontinued some smaller ring gauges, but they brought in some larger ones. But overall, I think they've been very receptive. At least especially American market. I mean, even though it's not the market that's allowed to buy them, it's been very positive towards them. And I'd be interested to see how it is received in Europe. But for the most part, I'm thinking they're doing a very good job. It's some people say they're years behind the American market, but they're also seeing what's going on in the American market.
They're make no mistake. I mean, they're paying very close attention to the American market. I mean, they see it as a market that's currently buying their product.
Yeah.
And they're paying a lot of attention to it, because I think that they also see the U.S. as trendsetters to some degree in the cigar market. And so it's no. Look, the reason that some of the small cigars have been discontinued is just because it's difficult to make so many different SKUs. The reason that so many new big cigars and big expensive cigars have been released is because it's a publicly traded company, and they see an opportunity to produce, since they're producing fewer cigars, to keep their revenues the same and their profits higher by offering cigars at higher prices.
Yeah.
Yeah. See, I kind of thought, when looking at a lot of the regional releases that have been coming out, a lot of them have been these larger ring gauges. They've been following along kind of the wide Churchill size and the sublimes and whatever, and they seem to be very successful in other countries. So, I mean, it seemed like this Robusto Supremo just blew up. You know, the new Cohiba.
Yeah. People. I mean, you know, Cuban cigars are still smaller than than the ones that are pushing the edge from the Dominican or Nicaragua or Honduras. But yeah, you know, as they go bigger, they're very popular. I mean, it's what was it this year? Did they do a 58?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, so I mean, we're getting very close to a 60 ring gauge Cuban cigar at this point. And I've smoked some that were in experimental phases. So I expect that we're going to see that soon.
Yeah, you know, I kind of felt like it was 2 years ago at IPCPR was when, you know, walking around you saw all these, you know, 70 ring gauge just monsters, all these just huge. Everybody was making huge cigars. You had companies that only made huge cigars. And then last year, it seemed like all of them were gone, and the market kind of settled on like a 6x60 size, if you will.
Yeah.
And so to me, part of me wondered if maybe Habanos was just kind of sitting back and watching to see where it settled, and then went, okay, let's put something bigger out now and see what happens. Because, I mean, the 58 ring gauge Cohiba, just from the feedback I've gotten internationally, is just blown up and gotten huge.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I mean, it's very popular. I mean, people like bigger and bigger cigars these days. I think that's an interesting observation. I wonder if it's just because you know, the nature of a public company is that they're going to react a little bit slower. Because, correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like a lot of those like over 60 ring gauge cigars are coming from boutiques and real small producers.
Oh, yeah, no, I mean, it was like 2 years ago. It was like companies I'd never heard of, and they were there for a year, and then they were gone. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it was just trying to get in on the fad. Whereas other producers I know, guys who have been in the business for a while, they all kind of settled on this 5x60 to 6x60 size, and it's like, yeah, that's just a size you make now. You know, you make a Robusto, you make a Toro, you make a Bellicoso, and you know, maybe a Corona Gorda, but you make a 6x60. That if you're going to put out 4 sizes, you know, 6x60 is going to be one of them.
Yeah.
You know,
it's interesting. It's so different from 10 years ago.
When you do the tours and you're going to the factories, what's your interaction with Habanos, and how are they to interact with you? Is there a positive? Are they really open, wanting to talk with a lot of you had an American group, or how was that experience?
You know, there's an important thing to remember. So the Cuban cigar industry is situated in different levels. So Habanos is really the customer-facing side of things, and
Cuba tobacco.
I'm sure you guys know this, but just for your listeners, you know, Habanos is the name we always talk about when we're talking about Cuban cigars, but really they're just like the marketing and promotion and final sale or wholesale sales to the different distributors around the world company.
Yeah.
And so they have a lot to do with the image of the brand. I mean, everything to do with the image of the brand almost. But they don't actually make the cigars, and they don't run the factories. So when I have a group down there, we actually don't have any interaction with Habanos at all. That may change. Habanos may want to get involved and do something to promote what they're doing, and I'm open to hearing if they would like to. But I haven't approached Habanos about that yet. I wanted to kind of get a couple tours in first before sort of reaching out to them. So when we visit the factories, we're basically dealing with Cuba Tobacco, which is a different company, and basically they're just a manufacturing company.
Yeah. Okay. And they're just like, come on in, welcome, you know, take a look around.
Yeah. I mean, they have there are several factories that they have around the country that they welcome visitors into, and so they actually have people who are trained to explain what's going on in the factory, and they do it. The factories are set up so that it's as inobtrusive as possible during those tours. So they are set up for that, and they charge for it. So you know they have an incentive to do it.
What about the farms? I mean, what do you see the differences in the farms there, you know, technology-wise, versus say the farms in the Dominican and Nicaragua?
Well, I mean, there's been a lot more investment in the farms in Central America and the Dominican, just because basically they get paid a lot more per pound of tobacco. So when you're in the farms in Cuba, you're probably not going to see a tractor. There are a couple of farms with tractors, but almost everybody is using bulls to pull the plows through the field, and stuff like that. So technology-wise, I mean, it's a huge difference. The farm sizes are also a lot smaller in Cuba. It's interesting. Most people don't realize this because when they think of the communist state of Cuba, they think of the state controlling everything. But actually, a lot of the farms are privately owned. So, like the farm that's owned by the Robina family is privately owned by them. The farm that's owned by the Pareda family. A lot of the famous farms down there are actually privately owned, and those are usually the best taken care of farms, but they're really on a small scale, and it benefits them in how they produce their tobacco. They tend to get a really good product out of it because it's smaller scale. But it's the technology is back about 50 years, and but they make a great quality thing because it doesn't take much. Yeah, it just takes a lot of effort to make great tobacco.
There must be this simplistic and old school and just beautiful vibe of going to a tobacco farm of that nature compared with that of Nicaragua or Dominican Republic, which is much different.
Yeah, I mean, I like my favorite thing always in visiting a place that makes cigars is the farms. I don't know. There's something, and that's probably just my personal preference, but there's a certain piece about being out there with the leaves, the wind blowing through the leaves and stuff. But there's a very different vibe. One of the best farms here in Nicaragua is AJ Fernandez farm, and he's a relatively new guy on the scene, and so what he's built on his farms is really like up to the moment, as efficient as it can be, and it's beautiful to see these just rows of green and everything looks so great, and it's very impressive. But when you go to the farms in Cuba, it's got a totally different vibe. It's not as impressive, but it feels very natural, and you get just a very peaceful feeling and kind of a human to earth kind of connection, if that makes any sense.
What about coffee?
When you go to like Manhattan, where it's all blocks because the city was constructed to be blocks and very easy, while you go to an older city, like a European city, and there's no pattern whatsoever to the roads. You just get lost everywhere just because it's kind of that old school, hasn't changed much vibe.
Yeah, it's kind of like that. And then there are these weird superstitions like if there's a large tree growing when you plant tobacco, you should leave the tree growing for good luck. If you cut the tree down, you're going to have bad luck with your farm. So so kind of like those old European cities where the streets twist around buildings and different things like that. The same thing happens in the tobacco farms, where you'll find a tree in the middle of a tobacco farm and no tobacco planted in a 20-foot diameter around the tree.
It's kind of beautiful, though, when you think about it.
Now, what about coffee from Cuba?
Cubita.
Coffee from Cuba.
What's your opinion on it? Because I love your coffee from Nicaragua, so I would be interested to hear what your take is on it, because I haven't had a lot of coffee from Cuba, and I mean I've had it before, but it was good, but I wouldn't want to say I was in a position to really sit down and taste it over the course of a week,
Yeah. It's sad. I think that it used to be, more and more the coffees from Caribbean islands are getting worse and worse, at least relatively to everywhere else. But I don't know why this is the case, but unfortunately the coffee in Cuba is not great. They have this method of preparation of coffee, which is world famous Cuban coffee, right? Basically, it's just an espresso with a ton of sugar in it, but you apply the sugar in a special way. That's very cool. and it helps when when you have coffee with a lot of defects in it to put a lot of sugar in it because it kind of covers up that sin.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's why that style of coffee was created. I mean, it very well could be, but the reality of the situation is, unfortunately, today the Cuban coffee is very hard to taste because it's hard to get a clear picture of the profile because there are so many defects in it.
Okay.
When we buy, I don't know how familiar you are with this terminology, but when we buy coffee, there's a certain measurement of how many defects per thousand beans you're buying, and defects could be anything from like an insect eating into the coffee bean while it was on the tree, or mold attacking the fruit. It's different things that are basically going to make the bean taste terrible.
Yeah.
So you want to remove as much of that as possible, and there are different standards that you can apply. Unfortunately, Cuba applies one of the lowest standards to that.
Okay.
So,
is it a grade? Because I always see higher grades from the different single region coffees that I buy.
Yeah, well, yeah. So one of the things that applies to grade is the number of defects. Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. So,
yeah, so it's interesting. I mean, I'm actually getting ready to do a big comparison, but I'm not sure if I should really do it and publish it because I don't want to say too many negative things. But I bought all the different Cuban coffees that are available in Cuba, with the idea that I would taste them all because we have a product that we call a Cuban style coffee, which is basically a Nicaraguan coffee that is selected to basically taste really good when you put a lot of sugar in it. and so it's a cool little package. It's actually our cheapest product. It's like $11.99. And on the back it has the instructions for how to make Cuban style coffee. So anybody can do it at home. It's kind of a cool thing. I thought that cigar shops might be interested in it, since cigar shops tend to always be interested in Cuban stuff. Yeah. And so anyway, part of the launch of that was going to be I wanted to taste all these different coffees, but as I started to taste them more and more, I was so disappointed that I was afraid that I was just going to basically have a big thing talking trash about them. Yeah. And I don't really necessarily want to go down that path. But I don't know. We'll see. I'll put something out. I'll put something out there about it.
So, just to keep going on the coffee tangent, because I don't care that this show is about Cuban cigars. I love coffee so much. What are your favorite regions? I mean, obviously you're a Nicaraguan, buyer and producer, but what are your favorite regions?
Wow. It's interesting. Central America is one of the greatest regions in the world for me. You have to be really selective, though. This is the problem. There are a lot of Central American coffees out there that are just whatever they are. I mean, they are from the country that they say that they're from, but they may not be the best, or just from one area, or just one seed type. It may just be a big mixture. I went to the U.S. recently, and I visited a couple what are called local roasters. I know it's like normal terminology for you, but it's hard for me to say. Because I wanted to just kind of see what they were doing, and I know their suppliers. I know where they're getting their beans from, because they're buying the same beans that we're buying, or from the same suppliers, right? And so I just kind of wanted to see how these local roasters were doing their thing, and they would put out these products that didn't make any sense, like it would be Costa Rican coffee, something like that. Well, what is that? I mean, the lack of specificity suggests to me that they're hiding something, or that the company that they bought it from is hiding something. Yeah. Because coffee has this big problem where you have to buy the coffee all at one time at the harvest, and then hopefully you bought enough for that year. If you bought too much, you're going to be serving people old coffee next year, and if you didn't buy enough, you're going to run out. Yeah. And so what I know happens a lot is these importers buy a lot of coffee, they stick it in a warehouse in Cleveland or Tallahassee or wherever, and it just sits there until they sell it all. And they're trying to mix in some good stuff with some stuff that they got a discount on, and some different things like that. And so when you go to the local roaster, and it's really exciting that you've got someone down the street who's roasting coffee, the same week that you drink it. What are they actually roasting?
Yeah.
And it's very interesting to see because it's completely on the other hand, you've got some people who are really specific and producing some really interesting stuff. I mean, coffee's getting very sophisticated these days.
Yeah.
And so, you've got some real specific, like this seed variety from this region of this country, which is pretty cool. I mean, I like some of the African coffees as long as they are less acidic. I'm not on the acid train that's flying down the tracks these days. I like a coffee that has a lot of, I like my coffee kind of like I like my cigars. I like it to have a big flavor, but I want it to be smooth, not too acidic, with a lot of body, and something that has a clean finish. That's generally how I like it. And within that, then we can have earthy ones, and we can have chocolatey ones, and we can have all these different things. But generally speaking, I like it to be down that path. I don't want something that's super acidy, which I don't understand why that's so popular right now, but it is.
Yeah.
At least among the loud people, that's popular. I don't know if actual real people are big onto it.
Interesting.
What do you think of Jamaican Blue Mountain? That's my mom's favorite coffee.
Is it? I've only had it once. I thought it was a fine coffee. I thought it was pretty comparable to some other ones that we have in Central America. I mean, I think they've marketed that product beautifully. I mean, it's considered one of the best. It's not as and it is it can be a very good coffee. It's interesting. Whereas like Kona, on the other hand, like Kona coffee from Hawaii is very popular, but it's actually not very good. It's just their whole thing was they wanted, visitors to Hawaii to basically have a good cup of coffee in the morning when they're in Hawaii, and then buy it every day of the year when they're back at home.
Yeah.
And that was their whole idea, and it works. They do it, but it's actually not a very good coffee. The Blue Mountain, on the other hand, is pretty good.
Now, how do you on a daily basis, how do you prepare yours? Because I know people are all freaky about how they make their coffee. I'm curious.
Yeah, I mean, it's the last inch of the marathon, right?
Mm-hmm.
The very important inch. I typically take my coffee in three different ways. Either straight espresso, which is how I started drinking coffee.
Uh-huh.
Or my wife likes to have cappuccinos, so sometimes when we get up in the morning, either she makes cappuccinos or I make cappuccinos.
Uh-huh.
And lastly, a gravity-fed filter coffee.
Okay. Nice.
We have a lot of the devices for other things like AeroPress and all that kind of stuff, but I prefer to just use an espresso machine rather than an AeroPress.
Yeah, I love espresso. I drink espresso almost every day. Absolutely love it. Just by itself.
Did you try our espresso?
No, I have not. When I got from Akil, he had came in for a show and or an event, I should say, and he had half a dozen pounds on him, and I tried. I just made some, out of a coffee machine at the shop, and it was fantastic. And so I harassed a couple pounds out of him, and I use just a pour over Chemex on a daily basis, and that's what I drink.
Gravity fed. That's what I mean.
Yeah. That's what I prefer. I think I can drink that black all day long. If I whatever's left over, I can throw it in the fridge and drink it iced later. And I typically, when I drink espresso, I drink that later in the day, 4 or 5 o'clock after work, to kind of keep me going through the night. And I love espresso. I could drink espresso all day. I mean, it'd make me crazy, but.
The reason I was asking if you've tried the espresso is because our espresso is, as far as I know, it's really unique because we're using 100% Arabica beans in our espresso.
Uh-huh.
So that's not normal. Normally, espresso contains a lot of really Robusta beans, which are a low-quality bean, have a lot of bitterness. They also have a lot of acid, so that creates that skuma, that little cream top, right?
Uh-huh.
So if you make 100% Arabica version of an espresso, you're not going to get that skuma.
Interesting.
So that's a problem. Because if the regular espresso drinker expects to see that and they don't see it, they're going to think there's something wrong with the coffee, right?
Yeah, for sure.
So we dug into the science of what creates that head on top of the coffee, and figured out a way with an African style of preparation of the coffee when it's laying out in the sun to actually infuse the beans with the oils from the fruit that normally grow on those beans in order that Arabica beans, the high quality beans, will still produce that skuma in the espresso. So if you drink the twin engine coffee espresso, you're going to have 100% Arabica espresso, but it has the head that you expect from an espresso, and it has a much cleaner finish, much less bitterness, and still a super rich.
Interesting.
I am learning so much right now. This is fascinating.
Well, I could do it hours on coffee. I've got pounds of different regions that I blend them all, and whatever. They all have the different flavors to them, the different cupping notes, and so you can combine it. You can kind of combine. I mean, I bought some Nicaraguan beans a while back, I don't know, like 2 weeks ago, and cut them with some Guatemalan. I've got a local roaster here that is actually really good about that's really good about getting high quality beans from different regions and growers. And he said, he'll tell me like this is not, this is a Yirgacheffe. It's this quality bean. It's from this region and this farmer and blah 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 blah.
I don't mean to talk trash about all the local roasters. It's kind of like a fashionable thing right now. And a lot of them are
so many of them. They suck.
Yeah, a lot of them are doing a terrible job because they're all getting their stuff from the same suppliers. The suppliers aren't really telling them what they're getting. But having said that, there are also some really passionate, good people out there who are local roasters.
And to be completely honest, because I go to everywhere I go, I seek out those places to just look and see if they have anything interesting. I'll try what they have, and if I like it, I'll buy a pound or two. But really, in all my searches, there's only been 2 places in California that I've been to where I felt like that was going on. And I obviously know less than you in that regard, but it wasn't like, oh, this is a Yirgacheffe. It was like, this is a Yirgacheffe Shigitu region, came from this farm, blah, 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 and it's like, oh, okay. And then I try the bean, and I'm like, wow, this is fantastic. And the guy, I start talking to the guy about roasting it, and he starts going off on the different roasting levels and how it's changing this and changing that. And, I have a good relationship with my guy here in town, and whenever he gets something new in that's funky, we sit down, roast it at a couple different levels. He'll give me a couple small bags, try them out, see what tastes best, and go from there.
That's cool.
And a lot of these people, I don't think, there's only one place, and this is one of the few places that I've found that actually pays that much attention, I guess, if you will.
Yeah. No, it's awesome when you can find those things. It's it kind of reminds me, we're in kind of an interesting situation because, we're buying the coffee here in Nicaragua, we're keeping it here, and we're roasting it here, and then sending it to the U.S. So, the big benefit of the local roaster is basically that you can buy it right after they roasted it. So we have to compete with that. So what we do is basically we keep a really small supply of the coffee in Miami, and what we do is when we need the coffee, we send it UPS air freight and send it over there, and then from Miami it gets sent out to the customers.
Nice.
So it's kind of interesting that way. But actually, there's something that nobody ever pays attention to that I think is pretty interesting, and it's one of the things that makes us really unique. My wife used to work for the United Nations, and she worked in Africa a little bit for the Food and Agriculture Organization, working in agriculture. And or advising in agriculture. And one of the things she saw that there was a technology that had been developed to help poor farmers store their grains down on the farms so that they would last and that they would stay fresh. So we experimented with that and brought it back here to Nicaragua, and we're actually using these bags. So how we use it is the coffee bean. When the coffee bean is green from the farm, when the roaster buys it, it has a very thin shell around it. and
Yeah.
and it's like a membrane, and as long as that membrane stays intact, all the oils and everything inside the bean stays strong and are going to be full flavored when it gets roasted. But the reality is, most coffee that goes to any country, but let's just use the U.S. as an example, it goes and it sits in a warehouse in Cleveland or in Tallahassee or in Vermont or Seattle or wherever it is. And what happens in that warehouse is they're sitting in these sacks that are either made of plastic or of jute, and basically there's air exchange. And what happens is that membrane starts to crack. And what happens when the membrane cracks? It allows the oils to oxidize inside the beans. Mm-hmm. And so essentially all those coffees that are stored in that way lose flavor. I mean, they're still going to have flavor, but less than they could have. So what we do is every single 100-pound bag of coffee that we buy, we put in this special technology that was designed for these poor farmers in Africa. And then we put the jute bag around the outside to physically protect it. And so when we open up a new 100-pound bag to roast it, all those membranes are intact, and that flavor is as rich as it was when it just left the farm. So, any manufacturing business that you get into, especially if it's in these fine things that people like with taste, you have to try to find little angles, try to find ways to improve your product. And one thing that we can do by being located here in Nicaragua is we can really try to protect those beans as much as possible before roasting. And so I don't know, I just thought you might find that interesting, because most people just talk about everything once it gets to the roaster and once it gets to making the coffee, but that's actually something that happens before that.
And to be completely honest, and this has been, God, I want to say at least 6 to 8 months ago when I had your beans, and if somebody asked me just off the top of my head how would I describe it, I would say extremely rich. Like they reminded me of, there's some really, really good tobaccos coming out of Nicaragua that are extremely rich. It's very different than Cuban tobacco. They're rich, they're nutty, creamy, chocolatey, with an amazing finish. And it was a trip when I drank this coffee, because I killed it in like 2 weeks, probably a week or two. I killed a couple pounds, and if somebody asked me, what did that taste like? Well, I'd say, if anything, it was just rich, like unlike any other bean that I'd ever had. I know when Seth said we were having you on and you're the twin engine guy, I was like, oh my God, that guy makes the shit coffee. I mean, it was so freaking good. It was unbelievable. So, and I'm not as knowledgeable in regard to all the crazy, getting as in depth as you are, but I consider myself a coffee snob and a fanatic to a degree. I'm just not one of those assholes, that's real picky about shit. If I don't like a bean, if I don't think a bean's that great, then I go buy some beans that I like and I cut it with them and I start blending and toying around with it, and then I'll come up with something and I'm like, oh, wow, this is really great, Well,
and that's what matters. I mean, you just want to find stuff that you're happy with. It's like when you finally find that $15 bottle of wine, or that $6 bottle of wine, or that $50 bottle of wine, whatever your price range is, that you're happy with. You buy it by the case, right? I mean, that's what it's all about. It doesn't matter what necessarily got the highest rating in Wine Spectator. What matters is it in your budget and do you love it?
Yeah, for sure.
What cigars do you smoke frequently? What are your cigars of choice, and what do you pair with your espresso in the morning?
All right, so I've got a really weird one. I'd be interested to know if you guys have had this before. But there's a cigar that I just go through box after box whenever I can find it. It's the Por la Reñaga Panatella.
Yep.
You ever had that?
I love the Petit Coronas.
Okay.
He loves it. I hate them.
I don't like the Petit Coronas actually, but it's a totally different blend in the Panatellas. Yeah. I'm convinced, because the Panatella is a short filler cigar.
Yeah.
So most people overlook it. I'm convinced, and I've been told this, not by reputable sources, but I've been told this, and I'm convinced that the Por la Reñaga Panatella is short filler from Cohiba.
Huh.
and I can't substantiate that other than to say it tastes like it, and I was told that once. And I'm convinced that the Fonseca short fillers are Romeo tobaccos, scraps.
Yeah, just put in a, just interested. Interesting.
So that's a cigar that I always ask for. Every time I walk into a cigar shop in Havana, I always ask, do you have any Port Larrañaga Panatellas, especially if they're like 2 to 4 years old. That's my joint, as they say.
How available are they?
What's that?
How available are they, would you say?
Sorry, I didn't understand.
How available are they? I mean, it's not Port Larrañaga is not really one of the biggest brands in the portfolio, so they're usually they have them. I mean, it's one of those.
It's hard to find, to be honest, and yeah, it's they're a pain in the neck. Unfortunately, there are not a lot of distributors that carry them around the world.
Yeah.
And in Cuba, they're supposed to be around, but you have to find a really well-stocked tobacconist there that's actually going to have them. But the price is phenomenal. They're like $165 each.
Wow.
Yeah. What about other countries, Nicaragua and Dominican?
The stuff that I smoke, I still smoke a lot of Nicaraguan, Dominican, and Honduran cigars just to kind of like understand what's going on around the industry.
Uh-huh.
But when it comes to what I like just for pleasure from those places, let me think. So in Nicaragua lately, I've been smoking a lot of the stuff that's made by Skip Martin over at Roma Craft. So like Intemperance and Cro-Magnon, but I like the Intemperance Connecticut. That's my favorite of his. There's some stuff. There's a brand that's only available here in Nicaragua, as far as I know, called Santiago. I met the guys who own it. That's pretty cool. I really like the Connecticut that they have, and also they have a Maduro that I think is Mexican Maduro. That's really nice. What else from Nicaragua? It's funny. Skip Martin and I are friends from the guy who makes the Roma Craft cigars, and so I find myself smoking a lot of his cigars just because I have access to them. It's not that easy to buy cigars here, really.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Have you smoked his B.A. Lonsdale, the AWS?
It was a long time ago. I think he gave me one sample of it to try.
Man, I love that cigar.
Yeah. He does some really interesting stuff. I think he's pretty interesting because he's the first. Well, first of all, he's one of a kind because he really actually started his own factory. Almost nobody does that. But the other thing that he does that's pretty interesting is he has a really different flavor profile that he goes for. I don't like all the stuff that he makes, and I tell him that. But I do like some of the stuff he makes a lot, and I find it interesting. It's not the tastes that he goes for are not traditional tastes necessarily, and I think that's pretty cool. He's really gone out on the ledge with that.
It's a nice factory. When I was down at Drew Estate, we went over there. It's a really nice factory.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, it's great, and it's getting better day by day too. It's he's been trying to build this lounge out in the front, and I think that there's a sort of a glass-walled humidor that's going to be there and stuff. It's very cool. He really takes care of his workers well, and is making a nice thing.
Yeah. He's doing better. I've heard. I don't know if you've seen him.
What do you mean, health-wise?
Yeah.
Yeah, we've been in daily contact, trying to make sure that he's getting taken care of as best as possible. He's still in very, very bad shape.
Yeah.
But the indications are that he's very likely to improve. The numbers are still bad, but he's very likely to improve.
That's good.
So we're very hopeful at this point. It looked much bleaker a few days ago. It's looking much better now.
That's good. That's good that it's still better. Catfish,
Yeah, and then
thing, man. We could go on for hours, man. I could.
Yeah, I know. I gotta run here soon. We're a half hour over. I haven't eaten dinner yet.
I mean, we could ask about Cuba and everything. And what's your favorite meal over there?
The easy answer is there's a restaurant called El Aljibe that makes the best chicken in the world.
Oh, good.
Simplest dish you'll ever have. Actually, it's not the best chicken. It's the best rice and beans. What they do is, if you order the special, which is called Pollo Asado El Aljibe, it's named after the restaurant. Basically, what they do is they cook whole chickens in blood orange juice and a mixture of herbs and garlic and different things like that.
Oh, wow.
And it's so succulent and juicy. It's amazing. But that's not all. What they do then is they take the juice from cooking that and they use it as a juice to garnish the rice. So they come around with 4 things when you order that. First, they bring you the rice. You tell them how much rice you want. Then they come around with that juice from the chicken. It's basically like a really rich chicken broth with some acidity from the oranges and then all the spices. So that kind of makes your rice amazing. But then they bring out these beans that have been cooked in a pressure cooker to the point that they basically turned into like a bean gravy.
Oh, wow.
And they're cooked. It's not just beans. It's like beans with garlic and onions and all this kind of stuff. And it's just this juicy, gooey, black amazingness. And you have them pour it on top of your rice. So now you've got this rice that's infused by the chicken broth with the gooey, juicy beans on top. And then all of a sudden they bring out this super juicy chicken.
Oh my gosh, I'm hungry.
It's spectacular, and it's only like $20.
Oh, wow.
Well, we'll have to. I definitely have to pay attention to it, and gosh, we'd love to get you back on. But thank you so much for talking.
Yeah, seriously.
Yeah, no, it's my pleasure.
Everybody,
thanks for having me.
We'll definitely put it up there, and everyone check out cigartourism.com. And you have a trip later this week? You said, or in a couple days?
Yeah, I've got a trip next week. I'm gonna go a few days early, but yeah, the trip is next week, and then I'm gonna be announcing some trips that people can sign up as individuals, because right now a lot of the trips have been people who brought groups to the table.
Yeah.
But let me just find this one real here. One that I think people are going to be pretty interested in is, the Partagas Festival that happens every November.
Yeah.
I'm going to do a trip that week. So that'll be November 16th to 21st. And so we're going to take advantage of the Partagas Festival happening at that time to incorporate some of the activities that fit within the Treasury Department license. And then when there's stuff going on that doesn't fit, then we're going to go off and do our own things.
Chicken cooked in blood oranges juice. Drink Havana Club, which is amazing rum.
And I do bring twin engine coffee out to the farms too. So when we're out at the farms, we have some nice coffee too.
Well, good.
Nice.
Well, Colin, thank you so much for coming on. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a pleasure.
I hope you get some panatellas in Cuba.
Thanks. I'll try to find out. I was trying to come up with some kind of fish name for myself with you guys' nicknames, but
no, I usually assign the fish name. I usually when I send stuff out, I usually give people fish names. So maybe I'll try and find some panatellas and send you some panatellas and give you a package with this fish nickname, and you'll be like, "What the hell?" But it's from Big Tuna. It's from Big Tuna. That's why.
I like it. Thanks, guys. I had a lot of fun. This was very cool. So thanks for having me on.
No, awesome. Thank you so much, brother.
Good night, everyone.